Welcome to Precept Steps, June 13 edition, where we are trying diligently to follow the commandments of Yahweh our Elohim and to observe his precepts. This Torah portion covers Numbers chapters 13 through 15, and it's called Shelach or Shelach Laka, which means send for yourself. Let's go over the Hebrew letters. First letter, remember we're reading from right to left, not left to right like we normally do, but right to left. So the first letter is a shin, and then a lamed, and then a het. That's the Shelach part. And then laka, a lamed, and a kaf. Now, if you remember, a kaf looks a great deal like a bet. They're very close to each other. There's some extra strokes that distinguish them. But this doesn't look like either of those, right? Remember, this is a soffit. This is a soffit poof or cough. And usually when we write it by hand, the tail would go below the line, so it would be lower than the rest of the letters. In this case, the person who designed this decided that they would just make it taller. But this is a final or soffit form of cough. So it means send for yourself, and the Torah portion opens with Yahweh saying to Moshe, send for yourself some spies. And spies in this case are just people that go into a place secretly to see what's going on, okay? And so they select 12 spies. They select 12 spies by name, one from each of the tribes of Israel. However, they do not send a spy from the tribe of Levi. And so how we come up with 12 is that the tribe of Joseph, remember now, is split into two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so that makes up the 12. And there are two men that are mentioned in this list of spies that we're going to become very familiar with their names. So I'm going to point them out now. And the first one is Caleb or Caleb. And he is from the tribe of Judah. And then we already know Joshua. He is Moses' right-hand man, right? And he is from the tribe of Ephraim. So they gather these 12 men, and Moshe says, go in and look it over. Now, when Moshe says this, there seems to be a tone to what he's saying to the men of, I don't want you to go in and come back and tell me whether you think we can take it or not. It's not if, but how. How will we go about going into and taking the land that God has promised us? There's a big difference between if and how. And we're going to see this as our story unfolds today. But it's important for us to understand at this point that Moshe is asking the men, go into the land and come back and talk to me about how we're going to go in and take the land. And he also says, come back to me and give me a report. Those distinctions are important. Before the 12 spies leave to visit Canaan, Moshe calls Joshua aside. And we call him Joshua, but his name was actually Hoshea. So in Numbers 13:8, it says from the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea was chosen to go. And Moshe calls him aside, and he says, I'm going to give you a different name. In Numbers 13:16, it says, Moshe gave to Hoshea, the son of Nun, the name Yehoshua. So, what's in a name? Why did Moshe do this? Well, if you look at the Hebrew letters, There's some different vowel markings, and we won't get into that, but I will point out, if I can get my pen. Yes, right here. The letters are exactly the same. I said the vowel markings are a little different, especially under the shin. But the really big difference between these two is that Yehoshua has a yod added to the front of it. And if you remember, yod is the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but it also, the sages say that the yod represents the hand of God. And so the meanings of these two names went from Hoshea, which means deliverer, to Yehoshua, where Yahweh delivers. So what's being said here? Hoshea was a deliverer. He did a lot to help the people as they moved through the wilderness to Sinai. Remember the battle with Amalek? Hoshea, or Joshua, was the leader of that battle. And he is the one that led the forces of Israel against the forces of Amalek and won the day. So that's just one example of where Hoshea was a deliverer. And he was apparently a mighty man. Moshe takes him aside and says, Hoshea, you need to understand. You are a mighty man, and you can do many things in your strength. But the only way you're going to get through this task that's ahead of you, is to remember that Yahweh delivers through you. You are not the deliverer. Yahweh delivers through you. And so he gave him the name Yehoshua. Yahweh delivers. So the spies went into Canaan, and they traveled various places, and they were there for 40 days. Now remember that, 40 days, that's important. And it says one of the things that they did while they were there was they came to the Eshcol Valley. And there they cut off a branch bearing one cluster of grapes, which they carried on a pole between two of them. They also took pomegranates and figs. So then they came back and made their report. But they didn't make their report to Moshe. They made the report to all of the people. And this is what they said. It's a great land. It's flowing with milk and honey, just as Yahweh said. And here's some fruit that we picked just to show you what it was like. But, there's always that word, isn't there? But. Their cities have walls and fortified up to heaven. And more than that, we saw the sons of Anakim. We saw giants. So basically what they're saying to the people is, which do you want first, the good news or the bad news? The good news is, yeah, it's great over there. Food is abundant. The land does flow with milk and honey. But guess what? There's giants there. Now, this picture that I have is probably a little exaggerated. To get an idea, we know that in Deuteronomy 3:11, it talks about one of the last giants that they dealt with. That was Og, king of Bashan, was the last survivor of the Rephaim, which was a group of giants. It said his bed was made of iron, is still in Rabbah with the people of Ammon. It was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, using a normal cubit. And my sources tell me that that is 13.5 feet long. 13.5 feet. Now, my David, is pretty tall. Grant's taller, but I don't know exactly how tall Grant is, so we're going to go with David. Mr. David is a little over 6 foot tall. He's 6'2". Okay, so if you took another David and stood it on top of his head, you wouldn't quite make it to a giant. So the picture isn't terribly far off. He probably needs to be up maybe at the bottom of the giant's hand to be the right ratio or comparison. But you get the idea from the picture. These giants were big, much, much bigger than the Israelites. And you have to also consider the Israelite people historically are not particularly tall people. They have a tendency to be somewhat shorter. So most of the Israelites probably weren't anywhere close to 6 foot. It says that King Saul stood head and shoulders above the other Israelites. So he was particularly tall. We're not told how tall he was. But just historically, the Israelite people were not known to be particularly tall. So, what are we going to do now? People are hearing this report and they're like, yeah, giants. I don't know. Well, let's talk about it some more. In Numbers 13, chapter 13 and verse 33, this is what 10 of the spies said. We saw the Nephilim, the giants, the descendants of Anak, who was from the Nephilim. To ourselves, we looked like grasshoppers by comparison. And you know what? We looked that way to them too. So 10 of the spies, 10 of the scouts said, picture on the left, we saw giants and we were like grasshoppers to them. Caleb and Joshua saw a different picture. They saw that Yahweh Elohim is mighty. So don't be afraid of them. Their power is taken from them. They are grasshoppers to Yahweh. We don't need to be afraid. You see, it's all about faith. It's all about perspective. Yeah, if you're going to fight the giants all by your lonesome, you're going to see yourself as a grasshopper. But if you believe, if you have faith in the word of Yahweh Elohim, who said, I will give you this land, who said, I will go before you, who put all the plagues on Egypt, who parted the Red Sea, who has fed us manna and given us water from a rock, and spoke to us from the mountain with fire and smoke and the sound of a shofar. Let's remember who we're talking about here. That's what Caleb and Joshua say. They're the grasshoppers, not us. But you see, the 10, what did they say? Let's look at it again. He says, to ourselves, we looked like grasshoppers by comparison. They looked at themselves and they looked at the giants, and fear overtook them. And they looked at themselves and they said, we are grasshoppers. And because they looked at themselves as grasshoppers, then they looked that way to the giants too. Read what the word says. Let's read that verse again. Listen carefully. We saw the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak, who was from the Nephilim, the line of giants. To ourselves, we looked like grasshoppers by comparison. And we looked that way to them, too. You know, we all have giants. And if we look at our giants and we look at our own strengths, we're going to say we're grasshoppers. That's not how we walk. That's not how we walk. We walk by faith, not in ourselves, but in our God, in our Elohim, and his son Yeshua, who said, I will lead you. I will protect you. Follow me. And then we don't look like grasshoppers anymore. Our giants become grasshoppers to Yahweh. So the report of the 10 scouts, the 10 spies, spread throughout the camp. It says people whispered and talked in their tents until everybody was in an uproar about this. And Joshua and Caleb stood by Moshe, and they pleaded with the people to remember who Yahweh was. But the people just got angrier. And it says in Numbers 14, verse 10, that the whole community were saying they should be stoned to death. They were so angry at Joshua and Caleb for them trying to remind them of who Yahweh was, that they were going to kill them. This is what kind of an uproar the camp was in. But just then, the glory of Adonai appeared in the tent of meeting, and all the people of Israel saw it. Yeah, Yahweh showed up. And he's got a thing or two to say to these people. Now remember, the whole camp is in an uproar over the report of the 10 spies. And he said, all right. You know, they said some pretty bad things. He says Yahweh brought them out to just have them and their children killed. Okay? And turns out Yahweh's had enough. In chapter 14 and verse 22, he pronounces what's going to happen. He says, none of the people who saw my glory and the signs I did in Egypt and in the desert, yet tested me these 10 times and did not listen to my voice. All right, so he identifies who he's talking to here, because he's going to pronounce judgment on this. But he wants to make sure we understand who he's talking to. And it's the people who rebelled against him 10 times since they left Egypt. And they're like, really, 10 times? Yeah, 10 times. I've got them listed here out for you. Time number 1 at the Red Sea. Oh, you brought us here to be killed. We're up against the sea and Pharaoh's army's coming and we're all going to die. Okay? At Marah, the water was bitter. In the wilderness of Sin, they grumbled about not having any food. God gave them food. And then what did they do? They disobeyed his instructions about how to handle the manna, and they hoarded it overnight, and it got worms. Remember that? And then he gave them a rule about the Sabbath, how they weren't to gather manna on the Sabbath, but they were gathered twice as much the day before. But nope, they were still out there looking for manna on Sabbath morning. Number 6, at Rephidim, they complained because there was no water. God gave them water from a rock. At Mount Sinai, after he had come to the mountain and they had seen him in the fire and in the smoke, and after they had heard his voice and he gave them the 10 words, the 10 commandments, they made a golden calf. That was number 7. Number 8, we just talked about last week. They complained about their hardships, and the fire came and burned the outskirts of the camp. And at Kibroth Havatah, they craved meat and rejected the manna, so they were sick of eating manna. And number 9, all right, that was number 9. And number 10, right here at Kadesh, where they were refusing to go into the promised land because of the report of the 10 spies. Yes, 10 times they tested God. He's had enough. This is a lesson to us. God does have limits. We think we can just keep doing stuff and ask for forgiveness and do it again and ask for forgiveness and do it again and ask for forgiveness. Maybe that's not true. God does have his limits. And I would suggest that, well, I would counsel that it is not wise to test the limits of Yahweh Elohim. So this is what Numbers chapter 14, verses 3 and 4 say, that the people were saying, why is Adonai bringing us to this land where we will die by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will be taken as booty. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? And then they said to each other, let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt. Seriously? Actually, it's even worse than that. There's another account of this time in Deuteronomy. I'm reading from Deuteronomy chapter 1, where Moshe is kind of telling them the story of what happened after it happened. Okay, so he's looking back and saying, so this is what happened. We left Sinai and went through all that vast and fearsome desert which you saw on the way to the hill country of the Emori, as Adonai our God ordered us, and we arrived at Kadesh Barnea. There I said to you, you have come to the hill country of the Emori, which Adonai our God is giving to us. Look, Adonai your God has placed the land before you. Go up, take possession, as Adonai the God of your ancestors has told you. Don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. But you approached me, every one of you, and said, hey, let's send men ahead of us to explore the country for us and bring back word concerning what route we should use in going up and what the cities we will encounter are like. Well, the idea seemed good to me, so I took 12 of your men, one from each tribe, and they set out and went up into the hills, coming to the Eshcol Valley, and reconnoitered it. They took some of the produce of the land, and they brought it down to us, and they also brought back word to us. The land Adonai our God is giving to us is good, but you would not go up. Instead, you rebelled against the order of Adonai your God. And in your tents, you complained. And this is what they said in their tents. It is because Yahweh hated us that he has brought us out of the land of Egypt, only to hand us over to the Emori, the giants, to destroy us. That's what they said in their tents. Yahweh hates us. Really? Where's the evidence here? You know, there's places where Yahweh reminds them, I carried you like a father carries his child. They're saying in their tents, Yahweh hates us. That's how far this has slid. That's how bad this has gotten. So what is Yahweh's response? He says, all of you people who saw this previous slide, all you people who saw all the signs in Egypt, who have seen all these things, who have tested me these 10 times, this is what's going to happen to you. You're not going to go in and take the land. You're going to go back to the wilderness. And you'll be there a year for every day you spent reconnoitering the land, that you will bear the consequences of your offenses. 40 days, 40 years. You're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. I've had enough. Then you will know what it means to oppose me. And in another verse, he talks about how the next generation, he said, you said that I was going to let your children be killed or taken as booty. They're going to be the ones that's going to go in and take the land. You're not going to go, except for Joshua and Caleb, because they brought a good report. They will be the only ones from this generation that actually goes into the promised land. It says the people were very upset. They mourned and they wailed over this judgment that was pronounced against them. And the next morning they went to Moshe and they said, "We have sinned. We're ready to go now. We'll go fight. We'll go fight." Moshe said, "No, you go up to fight. Yahweh is not with you, and you will be defeated." But Numbers chapter 14, verse 44 records that they went presumptuously. Even though Moshe said, "God's not with you," they went anyway and went on up toward the high parts of the hill country, even though the ark for the covenant of Adonai and Moshe stayed in the camp. And you know what happened? They got slaughtered. They got chased away. They got killed. You see, when God closes a door, he closes a door. And sometimes us going and saying, "I'm sorry," doesn't really matter. The opportunity that he had presented to us is gone. And that was a hard lesson for the people of Israel to learn right here. But our God is a kind and gracious God. Set the stage in your mind here. People of Israel have been through so much. Being slaves in Egypt, then all the plagues, going through the Red Sea, the wilderness, the manna, the water from the rock, the battle with Amalek, the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, the building of the temple, the tabernacle, learning how to do all the sacrifices, learning how to be a kingdom of priests. Went through all of that, and they got to the very edge of it, and they failed. Imagine the disappointment, the disillusionment, the sadness, the heaviness of heart. And in the last chapter of this Torah portion, in Numbers 15, Yahweh comes back to him and said, "Yeah, this is bad. But you know what? I'm still your Elohim." And he reminds them of the sacrificial system, especially the peace offerings and the offerings for unintentional sin. He reminds them that there's a way to draw near. The sacrifice system was always about how the people could draw near to Yahweh. It's all about drawing near, coming close, being in communion. And so in chapter 15, he reminds them that there is a way, that this gap that has happened between him and his people can be narrowed. They still have the tabernacle. They still have the cloud. They still have the pillar of fire. They still have the Ark of the Covenant. He has not forsaken them. He is still their Elohim. And there's one other thing he wants them to know. In verses 15 and 16, that this law is for everybody. This is what he said. For this community, there will be the same law for you as for the foreigner living with you. Who's the foreigner living with you? There were all kinds of people who saw who Yahweh was in Egypt, some of them Egyptians, some of them slaves themselves from other lands. They saw the God of Israel and they said, I want to be part of that. That's the foreigner that's living with them. For this community, there will be the same law for you as for the foreigner living with you. This is a permanent regulation throughout all your generations. The foreigner, the one who isn't born Israel, but chooses to follow the God of Israel, is to be treated the same way before Adonai as yourselves. The same Torah and standard of judgment will apply to both you and the foreigner living with you. You see, Yahweh's law, Yahweh's Torah, and his standards and his precepts that we've been studying and trying to grasp are for all people, for any who choose to follow the God of Israel, to follow the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. It's always been for everybody. And then he blesses them with one more thing. Tzitzits. Now, if you have been to the fellowship at Goshen Acres or other Hebrew Roots or Messianic fellowships, you will see that many of the men will be wearing these rope-looking things hanging from usually from their belt loops. These are tzitzits, and this is what God has to say about them in Numbers chapter 15. Speak to the people of Israel, instructing them to make through all their generations. So does this stop? No. All their generations. Tzitziot on the corners of their garments, and to put with the tzitzit on each corner a blue thread. Blue thread's really important. Okay, so blue thread. It is to be a tzitzit for you to look at, and thereby remember all of Adonai's mitzvot and obey them, so that you won't go around wherever your own heart and eyes lead you to prostitute yourselves, to serve other gods. But it will help you remember and obey all my mitzvot and be holy for your God. So, he says, make these tzitzits, make sure there's some blue in them, and you wear them. And when you look at them, they are to remind you to follow the ways of Yahweh. Now, why would a blue cord remind you to follow the ways of Yahweh? Well, here's an idea. And a lot of the rabbis and sages support this idea. In Exodus 24:10, when they went up to see Yahweh up on the mountain, in verse 10 it says, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a sapphire stone pavement, as clear as the sky itself. Now, if you're familiar with sapphire gems, they are blue in color. Okay. So the sages think, and some of the rabbis teach, that the Ten Commandments weren't written on gray stones like you see in the movie Ten Commandments, or often see in pictures. That they were actually written on a blue stone, on sapphire. And so that would be the picture here. Maybe they would look something like this. All right. But there's another possibility, and that's this stone, which is also blue and has some gold flecks in it, or some gold striping, if you will. And this stone is called lapis lazuli. And some of the sages, some of the rabbis think that this was the stone that was actually used to write the commandments on. Whichever it was, both of them are blue. So now it starts to make sense. If I look at that blue cord, that blue thread that is in my tzitzit, it will remind me of the 10 Commandments that I saw written on blue stone. And I'll remember to keep the ways of Yahweh.